Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
Corridor 7 was gone. The rifle kicked. Tesaro fired twice more and ran. The blast door had failed 90 seconds ago, and the Shorn had poured through like water finding a crack. 6 limbed bodies scrambling over each other, sensory pits tracking movement, exoskeletal plates scraping against the walls as they pushed forward in a mass that didn't care about losses. Varro was dead. Tesaro had seen him fall. Chest plate punctured, legs still moving as the Shorn trampled over him to reach the next target. No scream. Just a wet exhale and then nothing. "Move!" Halford's voice crackled through the comms. "Corridor 7 is lost. Fall back to line 2. Tesaro didn't need to be told twice. He was already sprinting, boots hammering against the deck plates, the weight of his ammunition dragging at his vest. 2 other riflemen ran beside him, Cobb and Inman. Cobb was limping. Inman was reloading as he moved, fingers working without thought. The corridor bent left. Emergency lighting painted everything in red and shadow. Somewhere behind them, the Shorn were still coming. Tesaro could feel it through the floor, the vibration of hundreds of limbs in coordinated motion. "Blast door ahead," Inman said. "I see it!" 20 meters. 15. 10. The door was half closed, grinding down on damaged rails. Miro's work. He had rigged every choke point on the station, but the Shorn had hit harder than anyone expected. Systems were failing. Backups were failing. Everything that could break was breaking. Tesaro dove through the gap. Cobb followed, his wounded leg catching on the doorframe. Inman grabbed his vest and hauled him through just as the door slammed shut. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then the pounding started, metal against metal, the Shorn throwing themselves at the barrier, testing it, learning it. "That won't hold," Cobb said. "It doesn't have to," Tesaro said. "Line 2. Go." Line 2 was a killing ground. Miro had built it in the 18 hours before the assault began. Barricades welded from cargo containers, fire lanes that overlapped at precise angles, directional charges embedded in the ceiling, walls, and floor. Every approach was measured, every corner calculated. When Tesaro arrived, the line was already manned, 16 soldiers in position, rifles trained on 3 corridor approaches, heavy weapons emplacements anchoring each flank. Bracken stood at the center. He didn't look like a commander. No rank insignia visible, no sidearm drawn. He simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, eyes moving across the defensive positions with the detachment of a man inspecting machinery. "Tesaro," he said, "report." Corridor 7 collapsed. Varro's dead. Cobb took a hit, but he's mobile. "Ammunition?" 2 magazines, plus what's on my belt. Bracken nodded. Nothing in his face changed. He turned to Halford, who was crouched over a portable terminal. "Numbers," Bracken said. Halford's jaw tightened. Sable's tracking 600 confirmed hostiles in the outer ring. Breach pace is accelerating. They're not probing anymore. They're committing. Fleet status. 42% boarded. 7 hours to FTL window. Bracken processed this in silence. 7 hours. 600 enemies. 20 soldiers now, including the wounded. "Understood," he said. That was all. No speech, no reassurance. Bracken walked the line, checking positions, checking ammunition counts, adjusting a rifle's angle by 2 degrees. When he passed Tesaro, he paused. "You held Corridor 7 longer than projected." "Not long enough. Long enough to matter." Bracken moved on. Tesaro found his position. 3rd barricade, left flank, covering the main approach from the outer ring. He checked his rifle, checked his sidearm, checked the charge on his tactical light. Beside him, Ewan sat cross-legged on the floor, a neural interface cable running from the terminal on his wrist to the base of his skull. His eyes were closed, but his lips moved constantly, sub-vocalizing. He was tied into Sable, the station's tactical AI. "Sable," Tesaro said. "What's it telling you?" Yuan's eyes opened, empty for a moment, then focusing. Contact density increasing across all breached sectors. Command cast signals detected in the second wave. They're organizing. How long until they hit us? 4 minutes, maybe less. Tesaro settled behind his barricade and waited. The Shorn came in waves. The first wave died in seconds. They poured into the kill zone without hesitation, 6-limbed bodies surging forward, sensory pits locked on human positions, limbs churning against the deck. The crossfire caught them from 3 angles. Bodies dropped. Bodies piled. The survivors scrambled over the dead and kept coming until there were no survivors left. Silence. The kind that pressed against your ears. Then the second wave. This time, they used the corpses. They pushed the dead ahead of them as shields, advancing behind walls of their own fallen. Slower, but covered. The bullets that would have dropped them instead punched through bodies that were already cooling. "Adjust fire," Halford called. "Aim low, legs and joints." Tesaro shifted his aim. The Shorn didn't have knees the way humans did, but their locomotion limbs had joints that bent. He fired at the gaps between segments. A body collapsed. Another stumbled, dragging itself forward on 5 limbs before a second shot put it down. The second wave broke 20 meters from the barricades. Bodies everywhere. The deck was slick with fluid. Not blood, but something thinner. The Shorn didn't bleed the way humans did. No time to process it. The third wave was already coming. "Contact front. Full assault." They hit the barricades. Close quarters. No time to aim. Tesaro fired into a mass of limbs and plating until his rifle's heat warning screamed. He dropped it, drew his sidearm, and kept shooting. A rifleman 2 positions down, Tesaro didn't catch the name, was dragged over the barricade by 3 Shorn. His scream lasted 2 seconds. Then it cut off. "Charges!" someone yelled. "Now!" Miro's voice came over the comms, calm as ever. "Firing!" The ceiling exploded. Not fire. Force. Directional charges designed to push downward, turning the corridor above into a hammer. Tons of metal and debris crashed onto the Shorn advance. Bodies crushed. The charge stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then Tesaro felt it through the deck plates. Vibration. Deep and rhythmic. More coming. Always more. Dunn moved through the line like a ghost. He didn't speak unless necessary. He checked pulses, applied pressure, injected stimulants, and moved on. His hands were steady even when everything around him was falling apart. Tesaro watched him work on Cobb. The leg wound was worse than it looked. Deep tissue damage, possible arterial involvement. Dunn packed it, wrapped it, and jabbed Cobb with something that made his eyes go wide. "You're mobile," Dunn said. "Stay that way." "How bad?" Cobb asked. "You'll walk. Eventually." Dunn moved to the next casualty. Tesaro counted the still forms laid against the back wall. 2 dead, 3 wounded, 1 critical. Unlikely to last another hour. Halford approached Bracken, who stood watching the blocked corridor. The debris wouldn't hold forever. The Shorn were already digging through it. The sound of scraping limbs carried through the wreckage. "Sir," Halford said, "ammunition status." "Report." 60% of initial load expended. Heavy weapons down to 40%. Charges. Miro has 8 left. Bracken absorbed this without reaction. Behind him, Ewan spoke. Sable update. Evacuation fleet at 47% boarded. 6 hours, 42 minutes to FTL window. 6 hours. Only 40% of ammunition remaining. Halford waited. Everyone waited. Orders? Halford finally asked. Bracken turned. His eyes swept the line. The barricades, the soldiers, the dead laid against the wall. Hold line 2 until it falls, then line 3, then line 4. No one dies for ground we plan to lose. And after line 4, there is no after. The fleet jumps or we fail. Those are the only outcomes that matter. Bracken walked back to the center of the line. Halford watched him go, then turned to the soldiers. You heard him. Check your weapons. Check your ammunition. Check the soldier beside you. We hold. The assault resumed 18 minutes later. Heavier this time. The Shorn had learned. They came in staggered formations now, spreading across the corridor width to avoid concentrated fire. They sent smaller bodies first, lighter builds, faster movement to trigger the pressure plates and contact mines. Explosions rippled through the approach corridor, but each one spent a trap that wouldn't be there for the main wave. They're adapting, Ewan said. His voice was flat, clinical. Sable's detecting command-cast coordination, tactical adjustment in real time. Can you disrupt it? Halford asked. Negative. Their communication is vibrational, physical, not electronic. I can't jam what I can't intercept. The main wave hit. This time, the Shorn didn't stop at the barricades. They climbed over them. They poured around the flanks. They filled the space with bodies until there was no room to miss. Tesaro's rifle ran dry. He slammed a fresh magazine and kept firing. Beside him, Inman went down. A shorn limb punched through his shoulder and pinned him to the barricade. Tesaro shot the creature twice in the sensory cluster. It collapsed, but Inman was screaming, blood pumping from the wound. Medic! No response. Dunn was somewhere else. Everywhere else. The left flank heavy weapons emplacement went silent. Tesaro looked. The two soldiers manning it were gone, dragged into the mass of shorn bodies, weapons torn from their mounts. Line 2 is buckling, Halford's voice cut through the chaos. Commander, Bracken shouted the order. Fall back. Line 3. Now. The withdrawal was controlled. Fire teams leapfrogged backward, each covering the other. Tesaro grabbed Inman, hauled him over his shoulder, and ran. His legs burned. His lungs burned. Everything burned. Behind them, Miro stayed. He crouched at the central barricade, hands moving across a detonator panel. The Shorn were 30 meters away. 20. 10. Miro! Tesaro shouted. Keep moving! Miro's voice was calm, almost bored. Fire in the hole. Tesaro threw himself through the Line 3 threshold just as the world turned white. Line 2 ceased to exist. The charges Miro had planted, in the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the barricades themselves, detonated in sequence. The corridor collapsed inward, then outward, then folded into a mass of burning wreckage that nothing could pass through. Miro walked through the blast door 2 seconds before it sealed. His face was blackened with soot. His hands were steady. That's one less line, he said. Tesaro set Inman down against a supply crate. Dunn appeared, already working on the shoulder wound. Ewan was muttering numbers, casualty counts, ammunition percentages, time remaining. Bracken stood at the Line 3 threshold, watching the smoke. Report, he said. Halford checked his terminal. 5 dead, 3 wounded, 1 critical, 12 effectives remaining. Ammunition. 41%. Time to FTL window, Ewan answered. 6 hours, 19 minutes. Tessero looked back at the sealed blast door. Through the metal he could hear it, the scraping of limbs against debris. The Shorn were already digging through. They didn't stop. They didn't retreat. They just kept coming. And behind them, somewhere in the dark between the stars, 10 million civilians were climbing aboard ships that couldn't leave without the corridor that relay station Kappa 7 controlled. Tessero checked his ammunition. 1 full magazine, 2 partials. His sidearm was down to 8 rounds. He settled behind the Line 3 barricade and waited for the next wave. Silence was worse than gunfire. Tessero crouched behind the Line 3 barricade and listened. The scraping had stopped. The vibrations through the deck had faded. For the first time in an hour, relay station Kappa 7 was quiet. No one relaxed. Quiet meant the Shorn were planning. This sector had been quiet once. Humans and a dozen other species trading, living, building something that worked, until the Shorn came and turned it into chains. That world was gone. Ammunition count, Halford said, moving down the line. Everyone. Now. Tessero checked his pouches. 1 full magazine, 1 partial. Not much left in it. His sidearm was down to 6. 32 rifle, 6 pistol. Halford logged it on his terminal and moved on. The numbers weren't good. Tessero could see it in the way Halford's jaw tightened with each report. At the center of the line, Bracken stood with Ewan. The AI operator's eyes were half closed, lips moving in the constant subvocal stream that meant Sable was feeding him data. Outer hull contacts, Ewan said. Multiple breaching pods. Fresh deployment. Numbers. 1,200 confirmed, possibly more in transit. Halford looked up from his terminal. 1,200? On top of what's already inside? Confirmed. Bracken's expression didn't change. He turned to Miro, who was crouched beside a support pillar, checking the wiring on a directional charge. Line 3 status. Miro didn't look up. Finished. Better than Line 2. Explain. Single-file channels. Pressure plates on the main approach. Ceiling collapses at 3 points. False walls for flanking fire. Miro finally stood, wiping his hands on his vest. They want to flood the corridor. They'll drown in it. How long will it hold? Depends on how fast they learn. Bracken nodded. He walked to the center of the line and addressed the soldiers without raising his voice. Reinforcements are landing on the outer hull. The first wave was a probe. What comes next will be heavier. He paused, letting that settle. The evacuation fleet is at 63% boarded. 4 hours to FTL window. Our job hasn't changed. We hold. We make every corridor cost them. Bracken returned to Ewan's position. Tessero checked his rifle again. A habit now. Something to do with his hands. Beside him, Cobb was flexing his wounded leg, testing the limits of Dunn's field repair. How's it feel? Tessero asked. Like someone shoved a hot wire through my thigh. Can you move? I can shoot. Moving's optional. Tessero smiled. The scraping started again. Distant at first, then closer. The Shorn were through the debris. Contact in 2 minutes, Ewan announced. Main corridor approach. Tessero settled behind his barricade, rifle raised, and waited. They came in a wave, and the wave died. The first Shorn through the breach hit Miro's channel system and stacked up. 6 limbed bodies forced into single file, unable to spread, unable to flank. The crossfire from the false walls caught them from both sides. Tessero fired in controlled bursts. 2 rounds. Pause. 2 rounds. Pause. Every shot counted now. The Shorn pushed forward anyway. They climbed over their dead, used the bodies as shields, tried to force through on sheer mass. But the corridor was too narrow. The pressure plates triggered ceiling collapses. tons of debris crashing down on packed formations. Each collapse bought 30 seconds. Each 30 seconds cost the Shorn dozens. "They're stacking," Halford reported. "Bodies blocking the approach." "Let them," Miro said. "More obstacles for the next wave." The first assault broke in 4 minutes. The Shorn pulled back, leaving a corridor choked with their own dead. Fluid pooled on the deck plates. The smell was sharp, chemical, not rot, something else. UN's eyes snapped open. Command cast signals disrupted. Coordination is fragmenting. "Meaning?" Bracken asked. "They expected to push through. Their model assumed we'd retreat under pressure. We didn't. Their command structure is adjusting, but it's slow. They're not built for this." For the first time, Tesaro felt something like hope, small and fragile, but there. "How long until they adapt?" Bracken asked. "Unknown. Minutes, hours. Depends on how rigid their hierarchy is." "Then we use the time. Miro, secondary charges ready?" "Always." The second wave came 3 minutes later. Same result. The channels forced them into kill zones, the crossfire tore them apart, and the survivors retreated over mounds of their own dead. Tesaro's rifle ran dry. He reloaded his last full magazine and kept shooting. 20 meters down from the Line 3 barricades, sparks erupted from the metal plating. Something on the other side was burning through. "Contact left!" Tesaro shouted. "They're flanking!" UN confirmed it instantly. "Breach in progress. Maintenance corridor on the other side. They're bypassing Line 3 entirely." Bracken moved immediately. "Fire team, Cobb, Inman, Rask, Tesaro, hold the breach. Buy time for Miro to collapse it." Tesaro was already moving. His legs protested, muscles burning from hours of crouching and sprinting, but he pushed through. Cobb limped beside him, rifle up despite the wound. Inman's shoulder was wrapped in bloody bandages, but he held his weapon steady. Rask, a quiet rifleman Tesaro barely knew, brought up the rear. They reached the wall just as the cutting stopped. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the metal blew inward. Shorn poured through the gap, smaller builds, faster, designed for close quarters infiltration. Tesaro fired into the mass, dropped 2, and fell back. Cobb anchored beside a support pillar and laid down suppressive fire. Inman covered the right angle, arms shaking with every shot. The corridor was too tight for tactics. It was just shooting and dying. Rask went down first. A shorn limb caught him across the throat, and he dropped without a sound. Tesaro stepped over his body and kept firing. "Miro!" he shouted into comms. "Now would be good?" 30 seconds. They didn't have 30 seconds. The Shorn were 5 meters away. 4. 3. Inman threw himself into the breach, blocking the gap with his body. He fired point blank into the mass of limbs and plating. A Shorn manipulator arm punched through his chest. He kept firing. 2 more seconds. 3. "Clear!" Miro's voice. Tesaro grabbed Cobb and dove. The charges detonated. The ceiling collapsed. Tons of metal and debris buried the breach, and everything in it. Silence. Tesaro lay on the deck, ears ringing, dust coating his face. Beside him, Cobb was coughing, struggling to breathe. "Inman?" Cobb asked. Tesaro looked at the pile of rubble where the breach had been. Nothing moved. Gone. Including Cobb, who was wounded, they were down to 12. The number kept shrinking. Dunn found Tesaro at the barricade. The medic's hands were steady as always, but his face was drawn. He'd been moving non-stop since the assault began, patching wounds, injecting stimulants, keeping the dying alive long enough to keep fighting. "How many?" Tesaro asked. 5 wounded, 3 serious, 1 critical. Who's critical? Dunn hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Osman. Shrapnel from the Line 2 collapse. Internal bleeding, I can't stop. Tesaro knew Osman. Quiet. Reliable. Never spoke unless he had something worth saying. He'd been holding the right flank since the assault began. How long? An hour. Maybe less. Dunn moved on. Tesaro watched him approach Bracken, watched the brief exchange. No raised voices. No visible emotion. Just two men discussing mathematics. How many soldiers? How much ammunition? How much time? Bracken walked to where Osman lay propped against a supply crate. The rifleman's face was gray, his breathing shallow. Blood had soaked through the bandages wrapped around his torso. The conversation was quiet. Tesaro couldn't hear the words, but he saw Osman nod. Once. Twice. Then Bracken handed him something, a sidearm and a full dose of painkillers. Osman looked at the items in his hands, looked at Bracken, asked a question. Ewan answered from across the line. 8.2 million. Boarding pace is accelerating. Osman nodded again. Good. Two soldiers helped him to his feet. He couldn't walk without support, but he refused to be carried. They moved him to the rear junction, a narrow corridor that connected Line 3 to the station's secondary systems. If the Shorn broke through there, they'd have a clear path to flank the entire defensive position. One man. One corridor. One purpose. Osman settled against the wall, sidearm in hand. The painkillers were already working. His breathing steadied. His hands stopped shaking. Charges are set, Miro reported over comms. He knows the trigger sequence. Bracken acknowledged with a nod. He didn't look back at the rear junction. One man holding the door behind them. There was nothing left to say. Tesaro checked his ammunition. 18 rounds. His sidearm was empty. Contact front, Ewan announced. Main assault. Multiple vectors. The Shorn came again. Line 3 held for 11 minutes. The Shorn had learned. They didn't flood the main corridor. They probed, testing the pressure plates, triggering the ceiling collapses with sacrificial bodies before the main wave advanced. Miro's traps still worked, but each one only bought seconds. Now, instead of minutes. They hit the secondary breaches simultaneously. 2 walls, 2 corridors, 2 new fronts opening up, while the main assault pinned down the center. Tesaro fired until his magazine ran dry, grabbed a rifle from a dead soldier, he didn't look at the face, and kept shooting. The left flank collapsed first. 2 soldiers overwhelmed in seconds. The Shorn poured through the gap, spreading into the defensive position like infection through a wound. Halford pulled soldiers from the center to plug the breach, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Then the rear junction lit up. Tesaro heard it. Sidearm fire, rapid and steady. Osman holding his corridor. The Shorn had tried to flank them, and Osman was the only thing in their way. The firing stopped. A moment of silence. Then the explosion. The junction collapsed inward. Fire bloomed through the corridor and died just as fast, consumed by the vacuum of the breach it created. 30 Shorn, maybe more, buried under the rubble. The flank sealed. Osman gone. Line 3 is lost, Halford reported. His voice was hoarse. Commander? Bracken stood at the center of the chaos, smoke and debris swirling around him. He looked at the advancing Shorn, at the soldiers falling back, at the corridor they'd held for 11 minutes. Line 4, he said. Fall back. Now. The retreat was ugly. No leapfrogging fire teams this time, just running, shooting, surviving. Tesaro grabbed Cobb again, hauled him toward the Line 4 threshold. Behind them, Miro stayed just long enough to arm the final charges. The corridor exploded. Line 3 vanished in fire and collapsing metal. 4 soldiers made it through the blast door. 4 soldiers. 1 line left. Line 4 was the end. No more fallback positions, no more prepared defenses. Just a single corridor protecting the station's control core, the system that kept the FTL alignment stable, that kept the evacuation fleet's escape route open. Miro had rigged what he could in the hours before the assault. Barricades, charges, a final kill zone. But everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. Tesaro found a position behind an overturned cargo container. His borrowed rifle had half a magazine left. His hands were shaking. Exhaustion, not fear. The fear had burned out hours ago. Ewan sat in the corner, neural interface still connected, eyes flickering with Sable's data stream. "Fleet status," Bracken demanded. "Boarding complete. 10 million civilians secured. All vessels sealed for transit." 10 million. The number felt unreal. Tesaro tried to imagine it. 10 million people crammed into colony ships and transports, waiting for the jump that would carry them to safety. Families. Children. An entire population balanced on the edge of a knife. "FTL window?" Bracken asked. 47 minutes. Halford approached Bracken. His face was streaked with soot and blood, not his own. His rifle was slung across his back, sidearm in hand. "Ammunition count is critical. 19% across all remaining personnel. Miro has 4 charges left." Bracken nodded and walked to the center of Line 4. The remaining soldiers, wounded, exhausted, running on stimulants and willpower, looked at him. "The fleet is loaded," Bracken said. 10 million civilians, every person we came here to save." He paused. 47 minutes until the window opens. Then they jump. Our job is the same as it was 6 hours ago. We hold. Cobb glanced at his weapon. Running dry. Bracken continued. "This is the line. There is no other. They come through us, or they don't come through at all." They all nodded. Tesaro checked his rifle one more time. Half a magazine. Behind the blast door, the Shorn were already cutting through. He settled behind his barricade and waited. The blast door lasted 4 minutes longer than Miro predicted. When it failed, the Shorn poured through like a dam breaking. Bodies filled the corridor. 6-limbed forms scrambling over each other. Sensory pits locked on the barricades. Exoskeletal plates scraping against walls and ceiling and floor. Miro triggered the charges. The first explosion turned the breach into a kill box. Fire and shrapnel scythed through the lead elements, dropping dozens in the first second. The second explosion collapsed the ceiling behind them, cutting off retreat. The third explosion, directional, angled downward, turned the floor into a crater that swallowed the next wave whole. "Fire!" Bracken's voice cut through the chaos. "Everything you have." Tesaro fired. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, each shot precise, despite the exhaustion dragging at his muscles. Beside him, the remaining soldiers laid down overlapping fields of fire. Every angle covered, every approach contested. The Shorn died in clusters, their bodies stacked in the corridor, creating obstacles that slowed the ones behind. For 30 seconds, nothing got within 10 meters of the barricades. Then the ammunition started running out. "Magazine!" someone shouted. Then another voice, then another. Tesaro's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, drew his sidearm, 6 rounds, the last he had, and kept shooting. The Shorn reached the barricades. Close quarters. No time to aim. Tesaro fired into a mass of limbs and saw a body drop. Fired again. Another. A manipulator arm swung toward his head. He ducked, felt it scrape across his helmet, came up with his sidearm pressed against a sensory cluster, and pulled the trigger. 2 meters down the line, Cobb was still firing. His wounded leg had given out. He was kneeling behind the barricade, using the metal as a rest for his rifle. A Shorn climbed over the barrier. Cobb shot it point blank. Another followed. He shot that one too. The third one grabbed him. Tesaro saw it happen. Saw Cobb dragged over the barricade, still firing, muzzle flash illuminating the mass of bodies that swallowed him. The shooting continued for 2 seconds, then 3. Then it stopped. "Cobb!" Tesaro shouted. No response, nothing but the scraping of limbs and the wet sounds of violence. One of the wounded soldiers on the right flank went down. A heavy weapons operator was torn from his position. The line buckled inward, soldiers compressing toward the center as the flanks collapsed. "Hold," Bracken commanded. He stood at the center of the line, sidearm in one hand, empty rifle in the other. He used the rifle as a club, smashing it into a shorn that breached the barricade. "Hold the line!" Ewan's voice cut through the comms, somehow calm despite everything. 25 minutes to FTL window." Tesaro grabbed a rifle from a dead soldier, didn't look at the face, couldn't look at the face, and kept fighting. The command cast was larger than the others. Tesaro saw it push through the mass of bodies. Taller, broader, exoskeletal plating thicker and darker than the standard soldiers. Its manipulator arms ended in bladed extensions that caught the emergency lighting and gleamed. It moved differently too. Controlled. Purposeful. Its sensory pits swept across the defensive line, processing, calculating. The soldiers around it responded to vibrations from its chest plate, coordinating, adapting, flowing around obstacles instead of piling into them. "Command cast on the line," Ewan shouted. "They're reorganizing." The assault tightened. The Shorn stopped flooding blindly and started moving with precision. Fire teams, flanking elements, suppressive clusters that drew human fire while others advanced. The line started to crack. 2 wounded on the left flank kept firing and died in seconds. The command cast directing the Shorn to hit them from 3 angles at once. The gap opened. Bodies poured through. Halford moved to plug it. Tesaro watched him cross the line, running low, sidearm barking, dropping 2 Shorn before he reached the breach. He threw himself into the gap, using his body as a barrier while he fired. The command cast came for him. It was fast. Faster than anything that size should be. Halford saw it coming, tried to bring his weapon around, but the bladed manipulator was already swinging. It caught him across the chest, tore through his armor, sent him staggering backward. Halford didn't fall. He dropped his sidearm, drew his knife, and charged. The command cast struck again. Another slash that opened Halford's side, spilling blood across the deck. He kept moving, closed the distance, drove the knife into the creature's sensory cluster with both hands. The command cast convulsed. Its limbs spasmed, scraping against the floor. Halford twisted the blade, pushing deeper, and the creature collapsed. For a moment, the Shorn assault froze. The coordination signals had stopped. The soldiers milled in confusion, their model broken. Halford fell beside the body he'd killed. He didn't move again. "Halford's down!" someone shouted. Bracken was already moving. He stepped over the bodies, reached the gap, and took command of the breach himself. "Defensive positions. Fill the line." 4 soldiers left. 12 minutes. Tesaro checked his rifle. 3 rounds. The Shorn regrouped faster this time. New vibration patterns rippled through the assault force. Another command cast. Somewhere in the rear, coordinating remotely. The hesitation ended. The flood resumed. "Final push," Ewan reported. His voice had lost its clinical detachment. "Everything they have. This is it." Miro crouched beside the last charge. A shaped explosive mounted on the corridor ceiling. His hands were steady, but his face was pale. "One more," he said. "That's all I've got." "Make it count," Bracken said. The Shorn hit the line. It wasn't a wave anymore. It was a wall. Bodies packed so tight they couldn't fall, held upright by the pressure of the ones behind. They pushed forward through sheer mass, absorbing fire, climbing over their own dead, filling the corridor with chitin and limbs. Miro waited. The Shorn reached the 20-meter mark. 15. 10. He triggered the charge. The ceiling collapsed. The corridor narrowed to a single gap, barely wide enough for two humans to stand abreast. The Shorn advance channeled into a choke point, their numbers becoming a liability. "Gap defense," Bracken ordered. "Everyone on the breach." The soldiers, all that remained on their feet, formed a firing line at the gap. Tesaro was among them. Dunn was among them, his left arm hanging useless at his side, rifle braced against a barricade with his right. They fired, reloaded, fired. The Shorn died in the gap, bodies stacked. The ones behind climbed over and died in turn. The floor became a ramp of corpses that the living used to advance. Tesaro's rifle jammed. He cleared it, lost 3 seconds, brought it back up just as a Shorn broke through the gap. He shot it in the sensory cluster. It fell. Another took its place. Dunn went down. A glancing blow from a manipulator arm that spun him around. He hit the floor, struggled to rise, and kept shooting from his back. A wounded soldier beside him was bleeding out. Dunn crawled to him, applied pressure with one hand, and kept firing with the other. 4 minutes, Ewan's voice cracked. 4 minutes to window. Tesaro had lost count of the ammunition, lost count of the soldiers. Everything had narrowed to the gap. The bodies coming through, the rifle in his hands, the trigger under his finger. Pull. 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 The assault stopped. Tesaro fired twice more before he realized nothing was coming through the gap. He held position, rifle raised, waiting for the next wave. Nothing came. The corridor fell silent. The scraping of limbs faded. The vibrations through the deck plates stopped. "What?" someone started. "Quiet," Bracken ordered. They waited. 5 seconds. 10. The silence stretched, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors and the soft groans of the wounded. Ewan's eyes went wide. His lips moved in the subvocal stream, processing Sable's feed. "Fleet is jumping," he said. "FTL corridor stable. They're away. 10 million people. Gone. Safe." Tesaro felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The fleet was away. The civilians were safe. Whatever happened now, they'd done it. "Why did they stop?" Dunn asked. He was still on the floor, still applying pressure to the soldier beside him. Ewan's eyes flickered. "Processing." Then he looked up at Bracken, and his expression changed. "Sable's detecting energy signatures. Massive. Approaching the station." "Shorn reinforcements." "Negative." Ewan paused. When he spoke again, his voice cracked for the first time since the assault began. "Human signatures. 5 capital ships. Hammerfall battle group." Bracken turned toward the viewport at the end of the corridor. Through the smoke and debris, through the bodies and the blood, the stars were visible. And in those stars, lights, growing larger. Warships dropping out of FTL, their hulls catching the glow of distant suns. 5 dreadnoughts, human dreadnoughts, more firepower than the entire Shorn assault force combined. "They came," someone whispered. Bracken didn't respond. He walked to the viewport and watched the fleet arrive. Hammerfall didn't negotiate. The 5 dreadnoughts spread into attack formation before the Shorn could react. Their weapons charged in the time it took for light to cross the distance between ships. The first salvo erased a Shorn cruiser from existence. The second gutted their command vessel. The third, fourth, and fifth turned the remaining assault force into expanding clouds of debris. Tesaro watched through the viewport. The Shorn ships, dozens of them, the fleet that had been meant to chase down the evacuation convoy, died in minutes. No escape. No surrender. They'd committed everything to breaking through Kappa 7, and now they were trapped between the station and 5 human warships with clear firing solutions. The battle wasn't a battle, it was an execution. When it was over, nothing remained but wreckage. The Shorn fleet had been annihilated. Their assault force on the station, cut off, leaderless, depleted, had nowhere to go. Hammerfall's Marines made sure of that. The first shuttle docked 15 minutes after the battle ended. Armed soldiers poured through the airlock, weapons ready, expecting resistance. They found bodies instead. Tesaro was sitting against a barricade when they reached Line 4. His rifle was empty. His sidearm was empty. His hands were shaking, and he couldn't make them stop. A Marine approached him. Full combat armor, helmet visor raised, young face. Couldn't have been more than 25. "Survivor?" the Marine asked. "Yeah." "How many?" Tesaro looked around, counted the soldiers still breathing. Bracken was standing at the viewport, unmarked by the fighting, watching the debris field where the Shorn fleet had been. Dunn was on his knees beside 2 wounded soldiers, still working, still refusing to stop. Miro sat against a support pillar, hands finally still, eyes closed. UN was slumped over his terminal, neural interface disconnected, mumbling something about signal patterns and fleet trajectories. One more soldier, Tesaro didn't remember his name, was propped against the far wall, breathing but barely conscious. 8 survivors. 5 on their feet, Tesaro said. 3 wounded who might make it. The Marine looked at the corridor, at the barricades, at the bodies stacked in the gap, piled so high they blocked the passage entirely, at the blood and the debris and the scorch marks from Miro's charges. "How many were you?" Bracken answered. He didn't turn from the viewport. 24. The Marine said nothing. There was nothing to say. The extraction was quiet. Medical teams took the wounded. Dunn finally allowed himself to be treated, though he refused to leave until his patients were stabilized. Miro walked to the shuttle under his own power, silent, his hands still steady despite everything. Tesaro was the last to leave Line 4. He stood at the viewport where Bracken had stood, looking out at the stars. The debris field was still visible, twisted metal and shattered hulls, the remains of an invasion fleet that had expected easy victory. A Marine appeared at his shoulder. "Transport's waiting. We're pulling out." "Where?" "Rendezvous with the evacuation fleet, then out of the sector. Vanta Reach is done." Tesaro nodded. He took one last look at the corridor behind him, the barricades, the bodies, the blood. He thought about Cobb, dragged over the barricade, still firing. About Halford, charging a command cast with nothing but a knife. About Osman, holding the rear junction alone, detonating the charges when the Shorn reached him. About Inman, throwing himself into the breach to buy 3 more seconds. He thought about the names he didn't know, the soldiers he'd fought beside and never spoken to, the ones who'd held the line and died without anyone watching. 10 million people were alive because of them. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like anything. Just exhaustion and silence and the slow realization that he was still breathing when so many others weren't. The Marine was still waiting. Tesaro turned away from the viewport, walked toward the shuttle, didn't look back. Behind him, relay station Kappa 7 fell silent. Ahead, the stars waited.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.